Welcome back to the What Problem Are You Solving podcast, where we solve problems even if you don't like it. I'm here with
That's
Ty,
right.
Adam,
Hello.
and special guest Brandon. So let's get right into it. Let's see. This week, let's go into what problem are you solving, Ty?
So I am solving that not a problem, more of a like a big up to my son, who is now a member of my fraternity. Big move for him, so I'm really loving it. It was great to see him, bring him in and go
Nice.
South Carolina. I'm also, guys, starting to solve my job problem too.
Oh,
So and it's actually going to be more consulting, which is actually good because it allows me to kind of bounce, and my ADHD will kind of kick in and I'll get bored, but it's good stuff. So trying to figure out how to get paid. That's what problem I'm solving.
nice.
Adam, what are you doing? What problem are you solving?
I am still solving the cohort problem. And I'm solving for my friend Brandy. I am no longer asking compound questions. So we'll see how well that's the problem I'm solving both personally and professionally. We'll see if that works. Building in public, we make other people do it. So if you hear me asking a compound question, tell me to stop.
You got it.
Alrighty.
John, what problem are you solving?
See, as for me, again, looking at all the stuff to get ready for the end of the year, I'm trying to improve the systems that I have. So, there's ways that I do things to keep myself organized, keep the family organized, and yet things seem busier this time of year. And I know they're only going to get worse with the holidays and travel and all that fun stuff. So I'm now getting ahead of the wave, right? So I see the big wave coming, and now I'm going to try and find a way to improve my system so that way I don't drop the ball on anything, and everybody's happy.
Is this a case of the best made plans of mice and men?
It could be, very well could be.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it does kind of remind me. There's a quote that basically like motivation doesn't win, but systems win. I know I'm horribly paraphrasing it, but when things go wrong, because we all know they're going to, it's who can pick up. How can you get back on the horse the quickest? That's what gets me motivated to keep moving forward. So,
All
So
right.
my
building
system,
better systems.
I tried to put all the healthy food in the back in the easily accessible snack drawer and all that.
That's smart. That's
Because
a
the
system.
but then eventually when it only works, then you got to maintain the underlying system. And somehow the unhealthy snacks, both from I admit me too, but the unhealthy snacks wind up in that what I call
true.
the healthy drawer. But we're working on it.
Cass, Susteen and Thaler, nudge, behavior architecting. You architect the behavior that you want people to adopt.
That's it.
There
That's
you
it.
go.
How about you, Brandon? What problem are you solving this week?
I've got way too many people I need to email and follow up with, and I'm trying to figure out how to fit those all into at the time of the day that I can with everything else I need to do.
How about it, man? If you solve that, man, I'll buy that for $1.
There you go. So
Here's-
Adam,
here's
I
a-
think this. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that this is that you introduce the work we're doing with Brandon and I, aren't you?
I'm going to, and I actually have something set up
Oh.
there. So I
All right.
because every week we do this. It's like, is it what pays? Is it what problem are you solving? Is it some special guest? Are we coaching? I think I've figured out how to tie this all together.
No pun
All right.
intended.
All right. So, problem are you solving sits clearly in the desirability bucket. What pays sits clearly in the viability bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We'll say John sits in the feasibility bucket. We'll just
In the
make this clear.
Put John there.
We'll just put John for now.
Nobody puts baby in the corner.
But yeah, I mean, so Brandon and I were talking last week about what pays part because he is solving a very important problem. So I want to get into the problem that he's solving, and then I want to try to meticulously unbundle those two things. So a lot of times when he's further along, but when we're first starting to talk to startups, we'll ask the initial question, like, what problem are you solving for who? And right away, we get into who's your customer, and can a customer be a user, or can a customer just be someone that's giving you something of value? And I think the feasibility piece of this in the design thinking world is clear. It goes back to that question. It's not can we build it, but should we? And should we is both, does anyone want it, and is anyone willing to pay for it? And I feel like even as coaches who clearly see that those are two different buckets, I feel like we got to take this back to old school economics, supply and demand. The viability is implicit in supply and demand. You have demand for a product, and you have, can you build it? Can you build it cheaper? Can you build it at scale? But they're really only two different things. So I want to clearly go back, desirability without messing up the what pays piece, and getting back to our roots of what problem are you solving. But then, since I already know some of the punchline here, he's solving an incredibly important problem, and so let's spend the second half talking about what pays and
Awesome.
and who
and for who. So Brandon, tell us about your startup, and then we'll get into some real good questions, Stormy.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of demonstrate a little bit about what the problem is. So I want you to close your eyes and imagine that you're walking to class on the first day of school, and you get an email that says the building your class is in has changed. If you're sighted, it takes you about 2 minutes to pull up the campus map and navigate to the new building. But if you're blind, that campus map is blank.
Right.
And you better be ready to be lost, because it's going to take you several hours to find that new building. And it's really, really hard to navigate to a new location that you really have no idea where it is. So that is the problem that we're really trying to solve here. We're trying to make geographic maps like Apple Maps, Google Maps, Esri Maps completely accessible to blind, keyboard only, low vision, deaf blind, and many other users who are unable to use geographic maps right now. So that's what we've done with our startup, which is called XR Navigation. And we've built a product called Audium, which is the world's most inclusive visual, auditory, and text-based map viewer and editor. Do you want me to describe a little bit about it, or do you have other questions?
So I'd love to hear more about it, but here's what's going to be really cool for you, Brandon, that of the three of us, two of us spent around 20 years in the navigation and mapping world. Literally,
oh, that's awesome.
Between the two of us.
I didn't know that one.
John as an engineer, and me as the guy going, why are you building that map? And what is that map supposed to do? And what value is it? Immediately, Brandon, I'm thinking, yes, but there's this concept in our former world and John Still world called dual use. There's a dual use part of this. That's where the military goes, great, has a commercial piece to it. What can we use it in terms of a non-commercial use, that, in other words, a national security use that could be incredible? I'm thinking first responders, I'm thinking war fighters, just immediately. If I need something and I can't look down at the map, and I need to have some inputs, and if something changes and I need immediate information, I'm like, whoa, that's where I was. I'm sorry. I don't know about you, John, but I was like, yep.
Calm down, Ty. Calm down.
Okay, I'm sorry. You got excited as I did. Like, oh,
I did.
This is pretty cool. I'm sorry, Brandon. This is really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of these things where it completely changes the paradigm of what a map is. So I'll kind of describe what we're doing. So the visual experience for people who do have some kind of vision is very similar to what you would expect from a map, except it allows low vision users to zoom in up to 200% without squashing interface elements, adjust the border width of features to make them easier to see, switch between using patterns or colors if you're colorblind, or it's completely keyboard accessible. Say, for example, you have some kind of mobility impairment and you need to use like switch control or speech control or something like that. And you can really just customize the interface to be how you want it to be. Our patented non-visual experience is like a video game where users hear the name and sound of objects as they move a character over them. So this would be something like Fillmore Street, and you would hear a concrete footstep and the name Fillmore Street. You also hear in what's called spatial audio different objects around you. So this would be very similar to if you're playing Marco Polo and you're the blinded It player and you shout, Marco, and you hear Polo all around you, you can like turn your head and rotate towards one of the people shouting Polo and then walk towards them. So we use that exact same concept using this idea called spatial audio. It's very, very virtual reality.
Is that something close to like echolocation for kids that click?
Kind of, except this is like constant, like looping sounds. And so it doesn't really have like a, you're not sending out a beat, a sound to it. It's just, it's more like you're listening to somebody and you're walking towards them as they're talking to you, or you're walking towards the sound of a car that's idling, that kind of idea.
Okay. And the closer you get is some indication
it gets louder.
Far away? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that and I guess the particularly nice thing about this is we take existing GeoJSON or vector data, anything that you can put into a geographic information system database, and automatically generate this map.
Yeah, so I am sharing a link to your audium.net.
Audium.net works. xrnavigation.io/audium-demo works. We got a bunch of different maps. Yeah.
Right. So at first glance, it's your normal Slippy map.
That's what we want. Yep.
But then I could see that you have other ways that you can turn on and off different features. So that's
And if you click the little Audium avatar in the middle of the map, then you can use your arrow keys to move around.
Very nice.
And so that also should activate the I think you need to click on the start the sounds, unmute the sounds button, and then it'll start an interactive tutorial where you can go and learn about how the map works. Anyway, wow. it'll take a 3 minute. It's like 3 minutes to learn about it, but it's an extremely effective way to communicate spatial information. So this is what I'm doing for part of my PhD research, and we just had a bunch of blind people and sighted people redraw a floor plan of a building after listening to a map, and they got about 85% accuracy compared to about 90% with sighted people redrawing a floor plan after looking at a map.
Nice. So first question comes to mind is you've got a working prototype that you've actually tested with some actual users. Which has been the greatest use case? Because you'll find as you start testing prototypes, because if you start with feasibility and you've already got something working, you may find people use it for different reasons, or they use it maybe one way the most often, and so you have to start doing Pareto's principle, right? Start figuring out what gives you the most bang for the buck. What have you found to be the most useful or the most used parts of this prototype?
Definitely. So as you probably know, geographic maps, it's just an enormous space. Everything in our society runs on geographic maps. So we have about 29 possible customer segments, maybe even 30 that we've identified, where these are all different places that have maps, from hotels who have like emergency maps and evacuation maps, to countries who have election result maps. I don't know if anybody is looking at those in a couple of weeks or in a couple of days.
Never heard of it.
Or hurricane maps. I don't know if anybody's looked at those recently. Or any types of maps. They're just everywhere, and each of these has their own unique customer segment. And so the types of maps that we've been focusing on primarily are smaller scale spaces like buildings and campuses and neighborhoods and that kind of thing. So the reason why we focused on that is because, one, the indoor map market is growing at about 40% year over year. and there's just tons of new maps coming out that are in the right data format for us to just use right away. And the second thing is that blind people, when they think about spaces, are very egocentric in how they're thinking about them. So there's a lot of theoretical science that we can talk about there from cognitive science, but basically it's easier for people to comprehend smaller spaces than it is, larger scale spaces. So we've done the US and we've done buildings. We haven't really done a lot in between. So that's kind of been our sweet spot is a little bit of both of those.
So I think that's the perfect segue question for this live coaching piece. Like, we are hugely supportive of what you're doing. I'm the one who doesn't have the fancy maps background. But
me either. I just happened to work there. That don't mean I understood what I was looking at.
So, we acknowledge you and I had spoken last week. That's how this all came about. And you had mentioned the 29, and I always seem to say, oh, that should be your blog post right there. But it's more than just a blog post. So that's your top-down Tam Sam Som. Finding a solution, looking for a problem, or a solution looking for a market, or theoretically, this is all the things it could be. That comes from, you could make the argument that VCs want a big market, and therefore startups go and determine how big a market could be, which is a reasonable exercise. Top down. Bottom up, the exact opposite, I think, is where coaches like us can be the most valuable, and say, okay, fine, I accept all that. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we are sometimes in the business of saying your customer is not everyone, your user is not everyone. But I do like the way that at least you broke it down into 29 different use cases and personas. So let's spend the next 10 minutes building it back up. Who's the first? You said, I try not to just force customer discovery into every conversation, but you said you've done some interviews, some market work.
Yeah.
Let's go bottom up. Yeah, let's go bottom up for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. So we've done about 200 customer discovery interviews, and we have currently 9 paying clients, including the University of Washington, NASA JPL, National Federation of the Blind, and a bunch of different conferences around the country. So conferences have actually been our most successful customer segment so far, which is really weird. But it kind of makes sense in a way, because they're usually accessibility related conferences or blindness related conferences. And they're like, of course, we don't have a map that we can give our clients, and conference exhibit halls in particular are a nightmare for blind people. Because you're literally walking into a wall of sound and you have no idea what's around, and you can't, it's really hard just to go and find somebody to ask directions because there's a lot of people and it's super, super noisy. So it helps a lot if you've got some kind of idea of where things are before you actually go into the space, so you can find the booth that you're interested in. So that is a really clear selling point that we've been able to communicate with a bunch of, I'd say over half of our clients right now have been conferences.
So,
wow.
So I saw Ty nodding his head, and obviously I'll keep making the joke. They've been in the map business for 20 years. All 3 of us have been trying to find, what problem are you actually solving? And in 10 seconds, you articulated a problem you were solving, a clear customer, paying customer, and repeatable, instances.
I mean, conferences are very small. Let me just say, I don't want to charge, tens of thousands of dollars for a conference because they just don't have that kind of budget. But yeah.
But Brandon, the reason why I shook my head is I had an opportunity to go to South by Southwest last year. And South by is not just in a hall. It's half of it's up the street, the other half is around the corner, and then you have one hall. And when you said the wall of sound, I thought about what that experience must be like, having not being able to, I can take a look, and even as a sighted person with the physical map, I still have to orient it, what part of the room, where am I sitting, and trying to figure out, and then walk around, and no, I'm in the wrong side of the building and have to walk all the way around. And so I understand a conference that has disabilities, but if I was going to a conference like South by Southwest or I don't know what the big conference center is in Atlanta, but if I was in DC, they have this just absolutely huge conference center, convention center. I could see it, just being there. Like, it is an alternative way for other folks who are not sighted to have the same access as this people who are sighted.
Yep, 100%. That's the whole idea, and we just kind of expand that idea throughout all maps. But for the conference experience, if you happen to know anybody at South by Southwest who who can help with that, I've pinged them, but I haven't heard anything back yet. So fingers crossed.
I do know somebody, Chris Valentine.
Right.
He runs the actual pitch competition. I will hit him up. If you send something to me, I'll make sure that he sees it.
Look at that, networking on the fly.
All right, perfect. Yep, that'll be great. Awesome, cool. So that's been our primary customer segment. We've also done a few campuses. So like NASA JPL has been one of our campuses. Universities should be a very slam dunk because there are about 4 different pieces of legislation that they know about that they definitely want to comply with. That require all their digital content to be accessible. And if you go to any university map right now, so like gautech.edu/map, or any other campus map, it's completely blank to a screen reader. And so that is
usually flat
huge problem.
PDFs or even stylized flat PDFs that aren't even really accurate or to scale or anything like that.
That's another problem, but yes.
John, can you bring up tractioncanvas.com while Brandon's going?
Yeah. So basically, that is one of our that was the customer segment we thought would be our initial client. And so since about November of last year, we really we started at a conference we're going to go to again this year that was specific to digital accessibility professionals at universities. And so we emailed probably, I want to say about, we ended up contacting probably about 50 people from that conference. So 50 universities from that conference. And then after that, there were people who give us business cards. And then, out of that, I think we probably got about 10 interviews, and we still haven't made a sale from that university collection yet. So they're really long customer segment sales cycles from what I've heard. So in our customer discovery interviews, we were told between 6 to 18 months is going to be your average sales cycle for a university. And although they know that their map is completely inaccessible, it's kind of on the back burner because they've got other problems they're trying to solve. And then usually the person that I'm talking with is the champion and not the person with the budget. And so that's a big problem as well. So they need to convince the person with the budget that it's worth their time. And on top of that, they need to feel like it's worth their time to do that. And since this is such a new thing, blind people have never had access to digital geographic maps before. They just don't ask for it. And so, we're kind of in this stage of where we've invented the iPhone, but people don't know that the App Store exists. Like, they don't know to ask for apps. They don't know to ask for, all the different things that go with a map, because the map is just not something that's part of their vocabulary. So a kind of a statistic I'd like to share is, have any of you seen a geographic map in the last week?
Oh yeah.
So that's because you work over there, man.
These will be, Apple Maps, Google Maps, Esri Maps, Hurricane Maps, Weather Maps, War Maps, any of those. Able-bodied people view around 300 maps a year. Contrast that with blind people who view less than 1. So that is the big gap that we're trying to solve here.
Wow.
How do you get to the point that you can overcome the economic saboteur, or I forget what Steve Blank calls it, but there's this economic decision maker. How do you overcome that so you can get to the point where you can get past that 1 to more than 50 maps for folks who are not sighted?
Yeah. And these are inclusive maps. So it's not just for people who aren't sighted. Just blind people are the ones who have the biggest negative impact to this. So that's kind of the question that I have for you all is, how do you sell broccoli to a baby? How do you tell? How do you sell something to somebody who doesn't really want to buy it because they're happy with their current solution because it works for them, but it doesn't work for 12% of their population? And how do you convince people that this is something that's important? So that's kind of the question that I'm coming in with. And my assumption is that we're going to have to like kickstart this avalanche, and once one university sees that a few other universities are doing it, then they're going to want to do it themselves, because they're going to be like, okay, people are starting to expect this now, and this person has it, and this person has it, and this person has it, maybe we should get it too. And that's kind of my hypothesis, but I don't know if there's a rule.
Yeah, so you said some really interesting things. So the couple things come to mind. The first of which being, so this is an inclusive map system, so it does include other types of conveying information, right? And so that was really kind of where I was going earlier with kind of what's like the primary use case, or what's like the one that you found maximum usage for, because all these other features, while awesome, the juice may not be worth the squeeze, or at least you might be getting more traction with maybe one feature of the map compared to these others. So that's one thing I'm curious about. And then another thing that came to mind too, when you talked about the legislation and compliance, that's an interesting way to think of it. Is it's not so much one way to think about the economics of this could be that it's not just about the desirability to purchase, but also the you are removing a pain of trying to be compliant, right? So there's value in acquiring your services, so that way it takes away the pain of 508 compliance or these other types of compliances as well. So ADA compliance, right? So that is valuable, but it's a different economic exchange.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brandon. I had a thought, but go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so our map can either supplement or completely replace their existing solution. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. You can have like a button on the side of the current, inaccessible map that says activate inclusive experience, and it just runs on the same data the current map is using. So, we've proposed that to several people, and nobody's took us up on an offer. Our ultimate goal is to integrate.
Did you ask why?
They prefer they just prefer completely having the full solution right there, and just like one thing that they're dealing with, or
not a pain point for them. Okay.
Yeah, or they say, we really like our current solution, but we don't have a budget above what we've already done for this solution, even though our current solution is not accessible. And so that's kind of been the feedback that I've gotten from that, which is really unfortunate, but it is what it is.
So you had 200 people, which I appreciate. That is completely
great.
Not aberrant, but I would say that we're not used to talking to folks who are like, how many people you talk to? 15? Oh God. Right. But so you have 200 people. At some point, you must have started developing a hypothesis around value, which I think is where John was going with this idea. Like, how are you quantifying what is valuable? In other words, anything that people exchange goods, service, attention for, the thing that you offer is what they're having value, even if it is less than perfect on your end, right? So what have you discovered in the value in your estimation or hypothesis around the value?
Well, like you were saying, it is legal compliance is definitely something that goes into the equation. So we can tell people that the average demand letter, which is before a lawsuit starts, is about $25,000. That's like the minimum cost of a demand letter. So we don't know how many demand letters get sent out, but we do know that about 4,000 lawsuits are filed each year in the US, and that goes up about 12% each year. So demand letters are what's first, and that price, includes all the legal fees and remediation, fixing all the problems that were identified in that letter. So that's kind of one piece. Any disabled person can send a demand letter out, and it's, I've done it. Most disabled people have done it. And then also about 20% of the universities in the US are under some kind of legal lawsuit around digital accessibility. So it's huge. Like, this is not an uncommon problem. But the issue is that we kind of are dealing with what's called a law as price situation. This is like an economics term where people just say, is it worth the risk of us being sued? Or is it worth the price of us being out of compliance? Is it going to be more expensive for us to be out of compliance, or is it worth, or should we pay to get it fixed? And so we're trying to get to that point to where we say it's worth you fixing it, because it is going to be super expensive if somebody does, sue you or send a demand letter to you. And so the problem that I think that we're facing right now is that since this is a very new thing, people just don't know to ask for it. They don't know to put it in the demand letters or the lawsuits. So nobody's had any kind of lawsuit around digital geographic map accessibility.
Well, if I just did a quick calculation, that's $100 million. That's $100 million wedge per year, right? So you said 4,000 times 25,000 just in this demand letters process.
No, 4,000 lawsuits. So
Right.
so it's more than that. So we probably can double that number for, like, just throwing it out of thin air. We could probably double that number for demand letters. Yeah. The lawsuits go from anywhere. I think there was a lawsuit that just got resolved in the US for $2 million, where it was actually not the state government that was sued. It was the developers of the contractors to the state government that were sued because they promised their content was accessible, but it wasn't. And so that just happened in California, like beginning of this year. And that was a big giant lawsuit that one of my colleagues filed. So that was huge. And I think that is starting to scare hopefully starting to scare some developers and development firms into making sure their stuff is compliant.
It's a lot of money, $200 million, even if it's back of the napkin, fly on the wall kind of money. It seems to me that I would be curious about not the in terms of your 200 people, what percentage of those folks were the folks who aren't users but are consumers. John and I have this joke about the users versus consumers.
All those 200 folks were the customers, the potential customers. Our users are a completely different segment. Everybody in our company is totally blind, except for one person who's our sighted developer. And then my admin assistant also is sighted. So we actually have 2 people that are sighted, but the rest of us are blind completely. And so we're personally building the tool that we want to use. On top of that, we've done a bunch of informal surveys at like conferences and stuff. So we just attended the National Federation of the Blind conference, where I think we probably spoke to about 500 blind people. Every single one said this is a problem. And most of them agree that, what we've built is extremely effective. And then on top of that, we've done academic studies with blind people, about 100 blind people in published research. So we've done a lot of work. And always when we do that, we talk to them about their experience with maps and navigation or data analytics, or different stuff like that around map usage. And it's real clear and, evidence that this is a huge problem. So, 300 people if you count the users.
So you talk to a lot of users, but what about the people who actually script the check?
Yeah, those are the 200. Well, that actually have the check. So I haven't talked to as many of those. So I talked to mostly the champions, the digital accessibility folks at the university. I've talked to I would say maybe, I want to say, and sometimes I don't know if they're actually the ones who write the check, but I would say close to about 30 of the people who actually write the checks, because they're hard for me to get to. But I have talked to a few of them. And I guess the thing that they're telling me is, they're happy with their current solution. They don't really understand the problem a ton. Like they're relying on their digital accessibility team, which, has up to now said they're fine. Like there's nothing they need to do. And sometimes they'll get what's called accessibility washing. So like there are some companies out there I'm not going to name any names, that will go to a university and say, we are completely accessible. And yes, maybe, possibly, according to the guidelines before our product was invented, that was true. But now, since our product has been invented, that is no longer true. We put out of compliance every single digital map now that we are actually on the market.
Well, yeah, there's a famous video that John and I used to show that talked about. It's called the Owlet Baby Monitor. It's a video that's on YouTube that demonstrates the problem that we went in. The people everybody said they had wasn't the actual problem that we ended up solving, and that once we ended up solving that problem, and it was like a monitor for babies for SIDS and respiration, all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, in that case, right, they were going after the nurses said they loved it. Hospital administrators said
like
they didn't
I ain't got a problem.
Want to buy it. Yeah,
right.
That's probably very similar to this.
Exactly.
It just makes me wonder how to your point, you're asking these guys, you come on at 9 o'clock at night or whatever time it is, at 8 o'clock at night to have this conversation, to talk about to Adam's point, the desirability and how do you overcome that. It doesn't seem like it's an economic issue, because if you do the math, as you suggested, just even with a conservative effort, it's potentially $200 million a year in economic economic hits to whoever, the universities or whoever are doing this. How do we get it to the point you can get them to go, oh, I need to pay attention to this?
Yeah. And it's not that they're not, like, the university itself has hired a digital accessibility person. Every single university has a person whose sole job it is to make their stuff accessible. Now, that is an inordinately huge task for one person to do, especially for some university like, Berkeley or Georgia Tech, because they've got 2,000 unique domains, and every single page on there needs to be accessible. And so they're like, I'm worried about, more basic stuff than a map. Like, I'm worried about that people actually put descriptions on their images, like, just in general, because, in order to be accessible, there's things that automated tests can fix or not fix, but can catch. And so, you don't even need a digital accessibility person if you've got one of these plugins installed, like the AXE toolkit from DQ, and they, these are these free tools that you can put on your website. Nobody does it in these universities, so sometimes they'll roll out things like just to catch some of these basic things. So they're trying to fix some of these more basic issues, and I guess we're coming in with one specific problem and saying this is a really big problem for the universities.
I'm curious about the economic buyer part of this equation, right?
Yeah.
So when I use Google Maps, I don't pay each time I'm going to use Google Maps, right? I know that I'm the product for Google. But that being said, what I'm curious about is I saw something recently like Life Straw. Have you ever heard of these Life Straws that you can drink like right out of a river through this carbon filtered straw? Well, when they're trying to send those to third world countries, obviously the users aren't really the ones that are going to pay for it. And so they're trying to figure out what are the economics of this Life Straw. And they found in many places, surprisingly, the carbon tax was the way that they were getting paid, because the alternative to fresh water through a Life Straw was actually boiling water, which means you had to burn wood to boil water. And so therefore, they could calculate how many fewer, carbon emissions came per usage of this straw. So then they were able to pay for it through carbon tax. So
wow, that's a jump.
Yeah, it's a huge jump, but they got it to work. And so that's where I'm really curious about this economic buyer problem that you have here.
Yeah.
Because your users aren't going to pay for it. You are having some friction, and again, I started to go down the compliance problem.
Usually,
but yeah, go ahead, Adam.
It's an assumption that your users won't pay. They shouldn't have to.
Right.
But we're gonna try to get more aggressive as we.
They're definitely very cash poor, time rich people.
Yeah, and so I didn't bring you on just to have this conversation, but like testing something. If no one thought people would pay for music because it was free, and then people did pay for music because it was better. And so I wouldn't
Right.
I wouldn't feel good if I ended the whole episode without at least testing, at small scale. The people that you were talking about, you opened up with an exercise. It's an excruciating problem. The thing that theoretically we teach, and at least going back to that, there's the conferences who are already paying you. They have a problem, and so I know you have a scale issue, and I want to spend some time at least before our hard stop. But even just as a thought exercise or as a pricing exercise, going back to that user, who again totally acknowledged they shouldn't have to pay, and the reason I brought up the traction canvas on the left side, you'll see, give Brandy and Craig some credit, but also on the mandatory and the problems on the left, one of them is mandatory, and so that's what John was talking about. You and John were both talking about how it's going to be a law. But that being said, I would be interested to see what would happen. Obviously, we don't just want to throw ads, on the map and the Google model, but like, what would happen if it was an app that was paid and,
if Google switched to, paid maps, so either it's like you get none or you pay per mile. I don't know. I'm hooked now, so.
Like people.
Oh man, I wonder how many people would go and storm the Google headquarters if that happened.
I'd pay.
Well, they wouldn't be able to find it. Oh,
yeah.
Dude, that's funny.
That's pure comedy on. Maybe this really is the best lean startup podcast.
But here's Brandon. I think that what John and Adam are both alluding to is something, especially John. Nobody would buy the straws because in order to do that, they had to do, and it became a substitution. And the reason why they did it because then they wouldn't have to worry about boiling the water. The substitute was straws for wood, right? And so there's an alternative value proposition. There's not an alternative. There's an adjacent value proposition.
Yeah,
I'm wondering. I'm thinking. I'm because I teach at a and I might be teaching guys. I might be getting a job at a university, by the way, in an entrepreneurship program. Going back into the university space, where are the adjacent value propositions that might actually pay for this? That doesn't come from the accessibilities. The first thing that popped in my mind was admissions. That if you could say, hey, admissions counselor, or this is something that you can offer up to the kids that are not sighted kids or other kids with other disabilities to get them into the institution, it doesn't cost that much, but now you have a sweetener for the deal that you're offering to these kids to bring them in that makes your university compliant without having to go to the compliance people and say, you need to make the university compliant. No, this is a thing that we're offering that's coming from out of our budget to bring it on campus that we can say to the families of the students that we're trying to recruit, by the way, this is such an inclusive campus that we're making sure that no kid ever gets lost, sighted or not, because they can have this, they have a tool that they can use.
Yeah.
That's just popped in my head.
Yeah, and universities often will do what's called university campus tours, and these are like these VR experiences that they'll do from the admissions office. And I have not talked to the folks who own those VR tours because we haven't really done that tour experience explicitly yet. It could be something that we investigate. So I should probably do some customer discovery on that. That's a good idea.
Because it's just completely adjacent. It's like, just like where else could it be? Where else could it show up?
For sure. Yeah. Some other folks on campus are the police department, who usually have some kind of map around safety. So there's one called Live Safe, I think, that we have here on campus, and they are completely blank. So I can't tell where, my wife is when she's walking around on campus by herself, or vice versa. I wouldn't be able to tell her where I'm at, or, put pins or anything on the map. So that could be another one. And you know, around the environmental stuff, we have an arboretum map here on Georgia Tech's campus. I don't know if there's some way around using carbon tax for you know, showing trees to blind people, but
The other one,
point.
the other one that in terms of who else could use this, and I'm putting my dual use hat on, like we talked earlier. I went to the Open Geospatial Consortium. Are you familiar with them?
Yes. I've never gone to the conference, but yeah, keep going.
Well, their whole indoor mapping, I just Googled it, indoor mapping. They have in 2020 an indoor mapping and navigation pilot that they created with NIST. And I didn't know NIST, and I have a relationship with NIST to look at Public Safety Communication Research Division. And so going to an organization like NIST and saying, what are you doing about indoor mapping? OGC is actually doing. And you happen to have at least two people on this podcast who know the COO for Open Geospatial Consortium, Christy Monaco.
Oh, wow. All right. Yeah, let's get love that contact there, because you know, we haven't really branched out into the I want to say, quote, mainstream, quote, geographic information system community. It's been really focused on the digital accessibility space right now, because I thought that would be our early adopters. And you know, conferences have been weirdly the places that all these people I thought, you know, are attending are going to these places. But you know, you're right. Maybe we should be going to OGC or these different places to talk about map accessibility from the ground, you know, from these mainstream conferences.
And in June 3rd through 5th of 2025, NIST Public Safety Innovation Summit is happening in Seattle, Washington.
Cool. Yeah, public safety is a big thing with, you know, maps. Like, blind people have no idea where the construction work is. I'm actually very scared to walk by myself on the Atlanta roads, because there are often uncovered utility hole covers, like utility holes, and there's nothing around them. And my cane will catch that, but if it doesn't, I am at the bottom of a pit.
Oh, not cool.
Not cool.
Not cool at all.
So if those could be updated in real time, you know, I would love just to be able to explore virtually the route that I'm going on. That would make me feel so much safer, and know that there's not an open utility hole that I am going to be passing. Or if I do, then I know where it's at. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to make sure that I send you at least the stuff from NIST, because I thought,
great.
Hey, that's pretty easy, and there's plenty of money. This is plenty of money, bud. Plenty of money. Yep, I'm going to send that to you now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hey, no problem. Wow. So what else can we help you with in our next, in the last 5
Adam,
minutes
did
or
we
so?
cover everything? Did we cover everything you wanted to get to, Adam?
Yeah, I think so. I think we could go. I would circle back and get very, very specific on a conference. I know you're just unsure about the scale there, but if we wanted to pull that up, we can do that as a post, you know, the weekly supplement to the show. We can go through a traction canvas, or we can just go through an experiment board that we use. But I feel like if you have 9 paying customers, mapping it out, bringing some of Ash's stuff involved, like how many do you need to break even? Is it truly just a cost per head thing? You know, you and I started going down this path on the university side, where it's cost prohibitive per student if you do the math that way. But I wonder if you get the venue and not the conference, or if you somehow get, I don't know. I don't know the answers, but I know that we can map this out. Like, what are your riskiest assumptions around growth or revenue?
Yeah, so the conference, there are about 400,000 conferences each year in the U.S., and these would be people who have some kind of map for their conference venue. And so there are many more events that go on, like weddings and stuff like that. And, you know, blind people getting married is another issue. But, you know, just talking about these 400 corporate events that happen each year, 400,000 corporate events that happen each year, you know, it would be useful to probably branch out of the accessibility conferences space. We are still Like we have hardly tapped that space. We've got 4 customers in that space. What I'm trying to do is, 5 customers in that space. What I'm trying to do is have those conferences introduce me to the hotels or the venues where they're at and ask for accessible maps of the full space, because they're doing just the exhibit hall map. So far, it hasn't worked super well, but I've only had it done twice so far, and none of those have really led to a sale. So I'm still trying to figure out, what's the value proposition from having a customer introduce me, to their venue and saying, hey, we want an accessible map of the space. Here's a company that can do it. You would think that would lead to a sale pretty easily, but it doesn't, because these people have not ever thought about accessibility. They don't have a digital accessibility person on staff, and so it's a pretty tough sell.
Have you? I'm sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
so even there, going from 9 conferences to 9 venues. Okay, you've explored that, but now I'd be curious to close this out. Just going from 9 conferences to 90 conferences.
Yeah.
In by the end of the year, and raising your price, or just figuring out, because you have you have desirability and feasibility proven. Like, they're using it already. Those are not just sales, right? Like, those are,
yes, they're using it. It's on their website.
Yeah. So, and you have viability to some extent, like half of viability proven. So at this point, again, I know you don't see that as the scale.
The problem with the conferences is that every single year, it's not like we have to redo their map because they changed the exhibit hall completely. And so, yes, that's great. And oftentimes what they want to do is exchange at least part of the price, if not the entire price, for a ticket for us to be at their conference. And so that's also been another way that, we've managed to get conferences. Not all of them have, that we've started to charge on top of that for most conferences. But that is also another reason why a lot of them have gone with us, is because we kind of supplement that price with us getting a free booth or a sponsorship on their page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, but
yeah.
And for 90 people, we definitely do not want to do that. And so it's going to be interesting for us to figure out, okay, what's the proper pricing now that we've taken that out off the table, and we don't want to be on, at their conference. Thank you.
I know we gotta close out. I know you got a hard stop, John. But in that, you said something that I thought was interesting, that every time you go to a conference or approach a conference, they would have to go and redo, because they have a new setup, whoever the new vendors are, and then you have to remap that. Do you all have to hard code that, or do you have a plugin that kind of converts all this stuff?
No, it's we have a cartographer who goes in and manually draws every single booth and then puts the names on the booth. They have scripts that help them with that. Like, for example, we ask for a spreadsheet with the names and the booth numbers. But then they run a script through, and it goes through the GeoJSON and name labels all the stuff correctly. But they do physically have to go in there and draw each booth manually. So that is a not super scalable solution. But in theory, what we could do, if they are open to it, is, once we've done it, we can give them that as, that template. If we actually build out an editor, which we haven't done for sighted people yet. We got it for blind people, but not sighted people. So they could go in and actually recreate their map for the next year in our tool, and then we don't have to touch it. Like, we could, in theory, just be there for the next year, and we wouldn't have to charge an extra implementation fee. So that would be a good way for us to do that.
So there is still some feasibility work that you have to do as well in order to scale this.
Yeah. We were not expecting conferences, so we were focusing on universities
Hardscape
for a while.
Yeah, Hardscape. Got it.
Awesome.
Interesting.
Well, this has been great. Yeah. So Brandon, thank you so much for coming on and letting us kind of probe your questions and your assumptions. And I think
Yeah.
it's a really fascinating summary that where you have, as Adam said, some clear desirability, some clear feasibility, and then you're trying to scale the viability option right now, and that's where a lot of your assumptions lie, and so we really want you to explore that, and again, try to think outside the box. Try to think, even though I started to lead you down the path of well, go with these conferences. You've done an excellent job articulating some of the challenges with these conferences, and so what are some maybe non-traditional ways that you could probably explore the viability part of this, the economic buyer part of this?
Yeah.
But food for thought. This has been fascinating. I wish you the very best, and we hope to keep in touch and see how everything progresses.
Please come back.
Great.
Please come back. We want to hear how you went and did tested some of the other alternate or adjacent value propositions.
Yeah,
That'll
for
be
sure.
cool. That'll be very cool.
Awesome. All
Good
right.
night, everyone.
Well, have a good one.
All right, guys. Brandon, appreciate you. John, don't eat too many Roadrunners. And Adam, I'm going to talk to Fegan soon. He's now here in every once in a while back in Baltimore. So, guys,
All right.
appreciate you.
See you next time.
Have a good one.
Thank
Good
you.
night.